Hello, I'm Dr. Tess Laurie, and welcome to Tess Talks. Today I'm speaking with Ian Jarvis, who is a retired IT programmer and system analyst who has focused much of his efforts and time recently on 5G and electrosmog and raising awareness. So I think we can describe Ian as an electrosmog activist. Is that appropriate, Ian?
That's okay. I'll accept that.
Good. Well, welcome, and it's such a pleasure to speak with you. We've had you speak at the World Council of Health General Assembly meeting recently, and it's a conversation that we need to keep having because there is a general perception that radiation from cell phones and Wi-Fi is safe, or there's nothing to worry about. I mean, you can't see radiation, you can't see any problem with it. The mobile phones don't get hot, there's no obvious danger. So, what is the danger with electrosmog, and why do we need to be worried about the time we spend on our mobile phones?
I think there are quite a number of issues that you've encapsulated there, Tess. So when I do my talks, I like to go back and even mention the times in the 1800s, in fact, when electricity first came along, because people were recognizing that there was illnesses coming along that had never been seen before. A doctor could work for 10 years in their practice and never see a heart attack and never see a cancer at all. And then suddenly they started developing. And it was Sam Milham, who was an epidemiologist, who started to study that. Arthur Fersensberg mentions him in The Invisible Rainbow, his book, and started to question it because it carried on really until it was about the 1930s that radiation sickness was actually recognized as an illness by all the people. They were all women, of course, at that time, in the telephone exchanges, particularly in America, when they were coming along. And we'd been looking at nutrition, vaccinations, drugs, chemicals, all these things we've been looking at. And nobody has ever really started to look at electricity as a possibility of a cause, or partial cause at least, with all these sicknesses that were growing. And it was Milham, who's still working today, who said he started his studies somewhere in the mid-late 1900s. And he noticed that there was a correlation between the electrification of he was looking at America, he is American, and these diseases that were coming along. So that led to the idea that electricity is causing some of these problems. Then, if you like, we can take a step forward to the 1990s. I remember when mobile phones started being introduced. And I have a friend there who was using one of the very first mobile phones, the big ones that we laugh at these days. And she started getting headaches. And I said to her, do you realize it could be related to your mobile phone? And she said no. So she started looking, and then she started using it much less. It was a work one that she was given for her work. So she tried to keep avoiding it as much as she could. So that was the first time I came across that as a real issue with people I knew. And the other thing that I noticed, even back then, another friend who actually used to run a music venue, and he literally became addicted to his mobile phone. The bands had to ring him on it. He had it because he was always moving around. So even back then, he was rapidly becoming addicted to that phone and would answer it no matter what he was doing. So those were 2 pointers I got very early on. And then as we developed more and more of that type of frequency, I mean, they were limited mobile phones in that days. They were both in London, and London was probably the only place that you could get them in the 90s. But then they started developing, and mobile phones became quite normal. I had my first one in 2004 when I moved on to a canal boat, to live on a canal boat, which I did for about 10 years, something like that. And I had an internet connection even then, which was it was the size like a memory stick, and that went in the side of my laptop, and that's where they started. And I was watching and reading. I had done some training in body therapy for my retirement, and I've been doing body treatments on people for some years as a part-time thing. So looking at that health aspect gave me that double angle, if you like. So, I had all those years of experience, albeit before any of this stuff came along. And then I had the body theory, which meant we were looking at anatomy, physiology, and so on. And then, of course, what happened? 2G, 3G, 4G all came along one by one quite rapidly. And there was quite a gap before anybody started talking about 5G, which is the latest marketing term, if you like. And what is very easy to forget is that for the last, at least 1 decade, maybe even 2 decades, we have been gradually getting a total cumulative load of all that radiation. It is radiation, not the same as nuclear radiation, but it is a radiation coming from not just the mobile phones, but the more we wanted to have access everywhere, the more 3G and 4G masts were going up all over the place. People were also using routers, began to use the routers. In the early days of the internet, we had something that was called a modem, which we plugged a cable in, an Ethernet cable, like you were saying you're using at the moment, which is great. So those came along, then routers came along, and the Wi-Fi revolution, if you like, started, because that meant, although the internet was coming into your home via this cable, copper cable in those days, rather like your landline phone that we all used to have in the 50s and 60s and so on. But then it was beaming radiation actually inside your home, and that is still what the routers are doing today. And one of the frequencies that they're using within those routers is exactly the same as the frequency that a microwave oven uses to cook the food that you put in it. Now, we all know 2 important things at this stage. One is that microwave ovens cook by jiggling about, that's a technical term, jiggling about the water in the food, and that's how it heats it up. The second thing we know is that we, people, humans, are high percentage of water. And if we think of the age range, now the water in me, particularly in my brain, is not going to be the same as somebody, a 5-year-old, for example. They're smaller, so they're more susceptible to the radiation. Their skulls are going to be thinner than somebody. I'm in my mid-70s now, so there's a big age range, and the difference between me and let's say a 7-year-old in our biology is enormous. So their brains are going to be much more fluid. Because they're developing, and particularly in the fetus also, they are more and more developing. So those frequencies that we are accepting in our home, not just from our microwave oven, but from the router, are going to be harming those children as well, more than me. So that's one of the things that I think we're not thinking about, Tess, that cumulative build-up. I think of cumulative in two ways. There's that time accumulation that I've really been talking about it. And then there's also the, in any one place, what am I exposed to sitting here? You know, there's my computer, there's my mobile phone, there's a router downstairs, there's next door smart meter. All these things are building up. There's maybe a Wi-Fi tower just over there, and so on. And then there's everybody else's networks, which are beaming across where I'm sitting at the moment. So that's one of the real dangers that we are not. I think it's possibly because it's impossible to calculate it.
I think people would say, well, you know, I've used a microwave oven for 30 years and I've had, yes, you know, been around mobile phones, and look at me, I'm still standing, you know. What sort of diseases are being caused by this type of pollution?
Well, I mean, definitely cancers are affected by it. And let's say straight away, it may not be just the radio frequencies. You know, the other things I mentioned earlier about poor nutrition, about chemicals, and the many things. You know, we've had all sorts of poisons scattered around our planet. You know, pesticides over food, just to mention one. So there are other things that I think will be having a contributory factor. You know, it's not just about one thing. So although we're talking about this one thing, let's not forget that in the background that other things are going to be involved as well. So yeah, there is a sense of the last straw that breaks the camel's back also, with this accumulation that we're going through all the time, that your microwave oven is not radiating very much out. So although they've been in existence for many, many years, then, you know, they've got this cage around them. And I suppose the obvious question to ask is, well, if it was all completely safe, why would a microwave oven need a cage around it to stop the radiation coming out? You know, that might be an interesting question to ask of people. And I have taken my meter, I have an RF meter, into people's homes, and I've measured the radiation from a microwave. Even when the door is closed, it's cooking something, I can measure it 2 or 3 meters away at the opposite side of the kitchen. So people who are using them every day are exposed to that each day, and maybe not high level, but the more we're exposed to it, the more that will build up. And because nobody's really investigating that, somebody goes to the doctor. Maybe they've got cancer, maybe they're having headaches all the time. Does the doctor say, well, let's check your electricity in your home? No, they don't. They say, well, are you stressed? Of course, another good reason. And they go through all the other things, but they will never ask about, at least I've never come across a doctor who does, say, well, what's your electricity exposure? What's your exposure to Wi-Fi, radiation? I've never, ever heard a doctor asking that question.
I think, you know, a lot of people would say, well, you know, if radiation from the routers was dangerous, well, surely our governments would have told us.
Yeah,
so what would you say to somebody who said that?
Yeah, I get that all the time. Yes, our government is.
They wouldn't have allowed anything dangerous. They wouldn't have allowed. They wouldn't have approved technology that was dangerous.
Yeah, well, I think we can refer to lots of other things in the past that maybe our government hasn't been quite straight about. Weapons of mass destruction and the Iraq War, for example, just to pick up one.
Where do governments get their guidance from?
The governments get their guidance, well, in terms of some things, from the industry, smoking, asbestos. Now, we know now that even when tobacco companies were saying there's no harm, that they knew, researchers come out, people have leaked or discovered experimental reports within the industries that showed quite clearly that there was a danger and that they knew about it as well. So all for 50 years, they would get somebody and get them, they would get a paid scientist to say what they wanted to say. So and that's the message that the government listens to, and then they put it out. I mean, we have that evidence. It's not that I'm making that up. It's not my interpretation of anything. It did actually happen, and you've only got to read a few articles in order to know that. The same is true with other things. Polio. How long did it take them to investigate what was causing polio and put it down to DDT? Because there was a clear linkage with DDT. So
I think one of the, if I could just jump in there, what I've noticed over the years is that when, the independent scientists are showing that there's a huge body of evidence showing that radio frequency radiation, microwave radiation is not safe, or is causing harm, shall we say. But it seems that the modus operandi of industry is not to test for safety. Now, if you don't test for safety, you can then say there's no evidence of harm, or they're able to say, well, we haven't found any evidence of harm, and so it must be safe. But if you haven't actually done the rigorous studies to look for safety issues, well, then you're not going to find them. And I think we've seen the same thing happen, if I may say, with the COVID-19 injections or vaccines. And that's also been something where the industry hasn't done the proper safety studies. And so they've been able to say, well, there's no evidence of harm, although there is, and the regulatory bodies have, they're highly influenced by the manufacturers and are paid by the manufacturers and have become enablers rather than watchdogs. So I suspect the same thing is happening with the telecommunications industry and 5G.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there are difficulties with biological research anyway. Doing it in the lab cannot mimic what we exposed to in real life. And epidemiology, which is a really useful study, people say, well, that can't give cause. It can give correlation, but not cause, despite the Bradford Hill criteria, which I'm sure you'll know about quite. So I think also Henry Lai. There's an example I use. Henry Lai, who's a scientist, still working, and in 2006 he had done a meta-analysis of, I think it was only about 300, just over 300 research papers about mobile phone. Not sure if it's just mobile phone radiation, probably was, as opposed to how it affects biological tissue. He came up with an answer which looked as if it was more or less 50-50. There wasn't much difference between the research, the numbers of research that showed no harm or not significant. And nobody ever says we had no cases at all. I've never seen that research paper that says there was zero of our cases that had any effect whatsoever. But what he then did, unusually, is suddenly thought, well, I wonder who's paying for these. And when he reorganized his stats to make a difference between the industry-funded studies and the independent and government-funded studies. The results were completely different. I think the figure is 70% showed some harm, significant harm, on the independent side, and the numbers were almost exactly the opposite way around with the industry. It was something like 68% showed no harm in the industry studies. So there is, again, there quite clearly some evidence that the funder, if you like, pays the calls the tune in terms, and it's quite easy to design studies to give the answer that you want. Scientists, of course, want to be published. They want to get their name around there. So they've got almost like a built-in incentive to find out what they want to find and what they think is publishable. And I think we can honestly say we've seen that with the climate models and so on. A lot of people have been going down that path as well. So I think you're right. There's a lot of evidence, and ICNIRP is the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, for everybody that's listening to this. And they were created as an organization in the 1990s. And these days they put on their website that they are not funded by the industry, but that they are funded by academics or academia. And I pose the question, who pays the academics in order to do the studies? And of course, that is mostly industry-based, some government-based, of course. And there are plenty of scientists who are coming out and saying, I can't remember the scientist's name, but he was doing a study for Motorola, who were quite happily paying him until he found evidence that they didn't want to expose and to talk about, and his funding was dropped completely. So again, that there is exactly that mirror from what you were saying about the earlier science. We are not actually getting clarity and truth. And for me, having been through the 3G, 4G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now we're looking at 5G, which everybody is talking about. And so you'll forgive me for mentioning it. I don't like to mention it separately, but unfortunately it has to be done. The technology in 5G is very, very different from the technology of anything before it. 2G, 3G, 4G were getting a little bit better, more facilities, more abilities, a little bit faster maybe as they went along. Now 5G's come along, it's like there's a curtain drawn down the middle, and this side is that 5G technology, which is completely different. And what I'm finding about that is that there's not so much information out about it. I could find stuff about 3G and 4G when they were coming along, but nowadays I immediately happy to confess I'm not as techie, sciencey as I used to be in my 50s. But I've got good colleagues working alongside that are and still looking at, and I can send them pictures or ask them questions, and they have to say, I don't know. I get people sending pictures of things on, little boxes on lampposts or boxes on traffic light posts. And they might look like cameras, some of them quite clearly, but others are not easily identified. What are they? Often my colleagues don't know.
I have to say, this sounds to me like it's another parallel with these new technology vaccinations, because the mRNA vaccines are totally new technology, and there's so many uncertainties, and many scientists and doctors can't explain them and explain the side effects or the adverse reactions that are occurring, many harms, and the answers haven't been forthcoming from the pharmaceutical industry either. So it really does seem like the same thing is happening with 5G.
I've not drawn that parallel before. I mean, that's your expertise, of course, and not mine. But yes, I think you make a good point.
It's a new technology, and it's just been assumed, it's been sold to the public as, oh, it's just a vaccine. You've had many vaccines before. This is just the same as that. It's not the same.
Yeah.
It's completely different, and
Right.
it has many, many unknown effects. So yeah, it sounds really quite similar.
Yeah, it does. You're right. Yeah. No, I can see that. I can see where you're going with that. Yeah. But
do carry on. So, how do people? How can you illustrate to people or demonstrate microwave radiation?
It is very difficult, as you say. It's silent. We don't hear it. Most of us don't hear it. Well, the interesting parallel there, though, is that some people many years ago were hearing, and still are, hearing electricity. It's not tinnitus, because there was a doctor that did a lot of work in it, I think in the 19 something or others. And when these people were taken away from any electricity, they couldn't hear anything. Now, if you take somebody with tinnitus away, they've still got the noises going on in their head. But with people who can hear that electricity sound, that's very different. And I don't know what the percentage it's been estimated to be. I'd have to check the figures for you on that. But there are certainly a number of people who can do that, and I think our sometimes we call them our canaries in the mine. And they are the people who are electro-hypersensitive. We are beginning to recognize that in this country. It's been recognized for a number of years in places like Sweden, but not in this country. And you may have heard of a case just recently back in July 2022, where the parents of a young girl took a school to a tribunal because she was sensitive. She couldn't sit in the class with all the Wi-Fi around it, but she could sit perfectly happily at home. So she'd go into the school and have headaches and everything, and come back out and be perfectly okay outside. I'm actually hearing quite a number of parents saying that to me, quite a bit nowadays in different groups that I talk with and so on. And
the classroom, I should imagine, is quite awash with electrosmog, because you've got the Wi-Fi, obviously, and then if all the children are bringing in mobile phones, it must be, if you are sensitive, quite a dangerous place to be.
I think it is. I think it's very, very much, and it's because you get when you get the radiations all mixing together, you get hot spots, and you get. I've used the word entanglement and been pulled up for using that word because it's using quantum. I'm not talking about quantum. I'm talking about the normal old-fashioned meaning of that word. So the radiation. Do you imagine dropping stones into a still pond? You get those radiations and those rings, and they come in and they bump together and they reflect on each other, and they're out of phase because you're not dropping them exactly in phase, so they're out of phase. Now with radiation, that's exactly the same, except in 3 dimensions, like it coming out like a sphere. And when they bump into each other, we can't really calculate what the effects are. Added to that, the anthropogenic radiation, as I call it, is also pulsing. And it pulses. There's a background level, and then there's pulsing levels, because every mobile phone, when it's sitting in your pocket, wherever your pocket is, it's always saying, "Where am I? Where am I?" It needs to know where the nearest mast is. The clue is in the name, mobile. So where am I? That's the way that it is able to receive a phone call, send a phone call, receive a text, and so on. By the old-fashioned word for it when I trained was polling. Saying polling all the time. It's asking that question for something or other, and so even though you're not using it, and I have many people saying, "Well, there's no call on it, Ian." So yes, it's listening. It's the faster you're moving, the more it's doing that, and the worse signal, the more it's doing it, and the more powerful they're doing it. So when you've got a poor signal, you're not safe because you think, oh, my mobile phone can't reach it. No, it's more dangerous because your mobile phone is struggling to reach it. So we've got those aspects of it, and I've slightly lost my train of thought then. So yes, in the school, coming back to the school, that's what you raised, wasn't it? Yeah, so you've got all that radiation mixing up. If we get 5G is now more like a laser. They call it collimated beams. It's not that same radiation. So that's going to put a beam into the middle of this mix. And how is that going to do it? And also, it doesn't have the same drop off of power that the old 4G, 3G does. They drop off quite quickly. You can be relatively clear within 10, 20 meters of a 4G. With 5G, it's not the same because it's that beam, and we keep trying to find out exactly how far it will go, but under something like 10 gigahertz, which is what they're using now, the lower frequency range, that's going to be miles. Yeah, and I have spoken to other technical experts, I say other, more technical experts, should I say, who absolutely agree with that. 868 is the chosen frequency for autonomous vehicles. Now, when I read planning applications from Mars, they say it can't go more than 50 meters. How could you make it relevant to a moving vehicle if it's only going 50 meters? That doesn't make sense to me. It's got to be able to go further than that.
Just thinking about what you're saying about mobile device constantly polling to say, where am I? I should imagine those GPS devices in all these new cars must have health implications too from radiation.
Yes, yeah, it's easy to forget about things like that, isn't it? Yeah, they certainly will have, and people who use those hands-free phones. Also, I don't know exactly what the radiation levels of them are, but I know many people say they're actually worse than the mobile, than your smartphone. So hands-free phones are not a good idea, full stop, whatever device it is. But yes, you're right. All those little things that we don't recognize, anything that's got a Wi-Fi type chip in it is going to be an issue. And there are more and more things, of course, coming along with Wi-Fi chips in them. What do they call them? The smart speakers, is it? When you say the Alexa things, Siri things, and those things, they're beaming radiation or their Bluetooth. Your Bluetooth speaker, haven't got one in here, fortunately. If I'm getting a remote speaker like that, I always buy one that is wire capable, as I don't like to use the Bluetooth. That's also dangerous. And things like earphones, and particularly the wireless earphones that have got no cord whatsoever. These little white ones, earbuds, I think they're called, aren't they? I mean, think about it. What are they doing? How do they coordinate with each other? By sending a beam right through your brain. So they're horrendous.
I must apologize to people listening to this who perhaps bought earphones for their children for Christmas.
I apologize.
We had hoped to speak about this before Christmas so that people could choose sensible gifts, but then we never had a chance to do so. So, as a parent, I cringe when I see my children with those earphones in, and my intention is to encourage them to not use them and distance them. But yeah, if you bought tech for your kids with mobile phones or these these Bluetooth earphones, one needs to spend some time figuring out how to distract your children and get them taken away again. For people reading my Substack who are aware, they will be aware that I recently discovered that that I feel a lot worse when I spend a lot of time, which I do, on my computer, long hours. I subsequently decided to get one of these. This was sent to me by a friend in the US, Safe and Sound. I know you use a different one, don't you? There are quite a number of these devices. And I tested, and I saw immediately that the environment that I sit in all day is exposed to extreme radiation. So no wonder I was not feeling well. So I've now put an Ethernet cable in, and I'll just show you. Now it shows slight to moderate. If I go a little bit further back, it probably hangs about more on. Anyways, slight to moderate radiation. If I unplug, I can put it on sound so you can hear it. So if I unplug my Bluetooth, I've got this trackpad, and it can do Bluetooth. If I unplug it, so that it goes onto Bluetooth, we immediately see it going up a little bit. Whoops.
It's those lights at the top that they indicate the strength of it, yes. Isn't it? Those lights. Yeah.
And then if I unplug the Ethernet cable, it pops up to extreme. Oops. And then, so if I turn on my cell phone, sorry, there's my keys dropping. Because I now don't use my cell phone. I just turn it on at certain times of the day. But if I turn my phone on, we suddenly go right up to extreme again. I just put the sound on for you.
Yes. The people will see. Hold it up again, Tess.
Sorry.
Yeah, people will see that. That's it. Great. Hold it there. Before the buttons that were lit up would be the ones on the left, the low ones, and now with all that on, it's going between the ones on the right, which are for the high readings, and that's the easy way to look at that particular meter without worrying about the numbers.
So they are
it's gone right down to the left on the meter, which is the lower range, the lower frequency range, the lower danger range. So just on that, and then I realized, and then I took it home, and now we've Ethernet cabled the home. If the phones are off, there's no Wi-Fi at all, and it certainly it feels better. So I don't get that the sort of heaviness in my chest, which was something I was experiencing after many hours in front of the computer in this, and I can imagine it's just a sort of a pool of radiation and which one's working. Yeah, you can notice the difference often. I do. I'm staying with a friend in London at the moment, and the last time I was down here, went for a walk down towards Rotherhithe on the Thames, and came to this. I think it's a museum or library of arts primarily, and we went inside there because there was a show on that night. And it's an old building on a corner, but the walls must be thick. There was no computers in there, and I walked around it, and I took my meter out actually to check, and it was one of the very few times that it was right in the very lowest zone of this one. The one I've got has got, similar to your buttons. This has got the LEDs on the side, down the side there, the red, yellow, and green. Which do the same thing as the little spots on there, and a histogram showing the strength of the signal. which is quite high where I am at the moment. And yes, it felt really different. There was something about the atmosphere in there that was cooler. Yeah, without a temperature change. Yes, yeah. So, I mean, sometimes, and I think in a much stronger way, that's what EHS people sense. They have a, all our senses are different. We all feel, sense different things. If you think of hearing, for example, or sight, some people are long-sighted. You can see a long way away, and some people cannot and have restricted, but can see quite well close. And I think the sensitivity to those frequencies must be on a similar spectrum. Yes, everybody is unique and individual, and our history is as well. So we need to be listening to those people.
Yes, I think especially as it's not finite, is it? It's not as if there's X amount of electricity or of radiation, and it's going to stay that way. We just seem to be increasing the amount of these Wi-Fi or wireless devices. They are everywhere, ubiquitous, and increasing to lampposts now, and as you say, smart meters in homes, and the wireless earphones,
yes.
and everything seems to be going wireless without any evaluation or review or assessment of safety.
No, I think that's right. Yes, it's the fact that we haven't stopped as a species to say, well, is this good? And I think we're not looking at the non-direct influences either. I was talking to some when, as you say, we were thinking of doing this before Christmas. Then I was talking to some people with children. And some 10-year, a friend of mine has got 10-year-old, and she was really nagging her mum to give her a phone, and it was very difficult for the mum to say no to that, because and then other people said, well, that's right, I spoke with a school teacher who teaches cooking, not the sciencey way, but real cooking, practical cooking in the classroom, like my sister used to do when we were at school. And she says the difference in engagement with the children in her class, where they're actually doing stuff and they've got ingredients and they're mixing it and they're all doing it and they can sample the results of it at the end of the class, she gets a lot more engagement, a lot more enthusiasm in the class when they're doing that, as opposed to what her colleague teachers say with the same children when they're in classrooms, when they've got doing the work on a tablet maybe, and they've got to work through a worksheet and those sorts of things. So I do think that we are losing that aspect of childhood, apart from of learning. I think it's much better learning, doing things practically. Are we going to have a generation soon that can't actually write with a pen? I mean, I don't know. These are questions that we haven't even addressed. And what happens if all the electricity goes and nobody can write anymore? We have to think of that. And the other thing that really, really worries me probably more than quite a few things that's not directly related to the radiation itself is the addiction. Because I think these devices are becoming more and more addicted. It is like a drug. And, when you flick with the screen something, you find something you want, you get it. Or when, let's say, a friend puts a post on Facebook and you see it, or likes your post on Facebook, there's a serotonin jump, which of course is addictive in itself. You want this pleasure response feeling. And I see more and more people walking down the street and they're like this, or like they're doing this sort of thing with their mobile phone,
And
walking around. And it's not an age thing either. I see people my own age doing exactly the same, and then I see youngsters. I see people, parents on buses giving their mobile phone with a video or something on it. I can see that to their child instead of talking to their child.
Mm-hmm. You see dogs walking their owners, not the other way around. Dogs patiently waiting, trying to coax the owner along a little bit. But owners, they just, it's very, very sad to see. And as you say, parents with their babies, and then when you combine that with a mask, and say you've got children growing up with basically with a phone or tablet, and a parent who's wearing a mask, and
I wonder if it's you may have a comment on this. I wonder if it's shortening attention spans as well, or one of the things that is shortening children particularly, and even adults attention spans. But I do find when I'm talking, sometimes people get restless. Not always, but when we were doing, I was doing with I often do an awareness talk, and then I come back later and do a workshop to show them how they can work on opposing master planning applications. And that's quite practical. We were doing it. We were looking at their council's website and so on. People were really engaged, much more so, I think, than in the earlier one, although people were very interested in the early one and always are. But when we were actually doing stuff, people, there was a much more sense of fun and of being actually doing something and think, I can see how I can use this sort of thing. So I think that's also an interesting aspect of it all. Yeah.
There's some people who feel really quite strongly that we need to stop using our phones or stop using these mobile phones anyway, and landline everything, and also the concerns about the environment, the birds and the bees and all of that. So and that there's an urgency. What is the best way of convincing somebody that I would say to anyone who said, well, who would be feeling skeptical, I would say the best thing is actually to get a device that can measure it, and then you can start to get used to thinking about how you feel in certain situations with the measurement, and just see whether it could be true. And I would just ask that you remain open-minded, given that we know that regulatory agencies can be corrupted, and it can take a long time before health effects of things are known. And also, thirdly, be open-minded, because we've never seen disease at the rate that we're seeing it now, with cancers and ADHD and autism, all sorts of diseases happening. So many sick children, sick, anxious, depressed children. So we need to start eliminating things to find out what could possibly be the cause. So if you could just be open-minded, bear those things in mind, and start doing your own research investigations, that would be my suggestion. What would your suggestion be, Ian?
Yeah, I think they're all very good suggestions, Tess. And that addictiveness of, it's the same thing, isn't it? If you have somebody who's addicted to, a food, for example, you try and reduce that load on it. What I sometimes say to people depends on my mood to some extent. But when they say, well, okay, Ian, I didn't believe that. I say, well, it's not about belief. It is about thinking. It is about doing some research yourself. You're not going to read, I'm not asking you to become a scientist all of a sudden, but anybody with a reasonable education can read a science paper. You can skip over the bits that you don't understand. You can look at the abstracts and the conclusions and a few of the arguments in the middle of it without having to go into the details. I ask them to actually start reading a little bit. If people say you're a conspiracy theorist, Ian, which I've had many, many times, I say, no, I'm not. I just look at the research. I do a bit of reading. I read behind the headlines, and that's why I do it. And then I make up my mind. And I just ask you to do that. Have you ever been lied to by an authority? And there's a bucket full of examples that we can use for that, even going back as far as Westland helicopters and things like that, which probably before your time in this country. So there are lots of things that you can do. The difficulty, as you said right at the beginning, is that we can't see it, we can't feel it, we can't hear it. And that makes it quite difficult. And getting a meter is a good idea, and you can get some quite cheap ones. Mine is I say only. You can get them even cheaper than mine was about £150, but you can get them cheaper than that. And if there's a group of you, you can share the cost of one and share it between a few families or a few people. A school, if a school, for example, bought a meter similar to this, similar to yours, out of the school budget, what would it be? Nothing. And it would also be educational for not only the students, it'd be educational for the teachers as well, because most of the teachers, and I understand this, will not be aware of what is happening. They won't have been through the studies, the research, and the things that I've done and other people have done over the years. So we have to be, as you say, open-minded, and I'm trying to persuade my council and councils all over the country to look into this, and they're not doing risk analysis. Whatever happened to risk analysis? The one industry I often point to is the insurance industry, because to them, risk is money. So they've got to do a good risk analysis for their own benefit. And they employ some of the best risk analysts in the business. I say it's money to them. And they, even as long ago as a decade, were writing in their annual reports. I was reading this at the time, writing in their annual reports, Wi-Fi and EMFs are an emerging risk, and we may face many claims in the future, and we need to be prepared for that. And the outcome of that, both for Lloyd's and Swiss Re, who are two of the biggest companies, Zurich, was to say we are not going to insure anybody against any effects or injuries of Wi-Fi or radio frequency radiation, EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies, that says for the audience. And that should tell us something. If they're not prepared to do that, then we should listen to that and say, well, tell us the story. The other thing that I found quite interesting when I discovered it, maybe last year sometime, I was reading through the actual document for the standard, the 2020 revision of the guideline. It's a guideline, not a standard. Okay, so we also need to understand that guideline and standard are two very different things, as I'm sure in your industry you know as well. Then it was that guideline issued in 2020. I've got it on this very computer. In the very early stage of it, it says that hospitals, because of their use of electromagnetic frequencies in treatment, are not included in the standard. We don't give a guideline for hospitals. They're totally excluded. They're outside the scope of the ICNIRP guideline. And that, again, is really interesting because it acknowledges from them that EMFs can affect biological tissue. It's a really interesting sentence or paragraph right at the beginning, and I show it to several people. I think I must be one of the few people who's actually read the whole document, because many people that I talk to who have been working in this for a long time suddenly perk up when I say, but hospitals aren't covered. I said, what? And again, that gives a message that they, even ignorant within its body, is saying, it is affecting biological tissue, however you define biological tissue. So those are some areas that I do point people to, and as well as the anecdotal things, like I mentioned earlier. My children, my young boy was unwell in school this morning. He was having headaches and not feeling well, and I had to go and pick him up and bring him home. He's running around 10 minutes later. And when you keep hearing that sort of thing, a child feels unwell or doesn't do well at school, they come home, and in the afternoon at home, they're running around perfectly okay. As soon as they're out of the range of that radiation, that effect is gone. And that, in a sense, is the beautiful thing. There's a video that about smart meters, actually, and it shows some blood analysis. So it shows the blood flowing clearly and happily in 3 people, and then it puts them in front of a smart meter for 2 minutes. 2 minutes, that's all. And then it shows the result with another blood analysis, blood microscopy. Have I got the word right? Yeah. I'm aware it's your field and not mine. And the results are quite different. And one person in that video, after 45 seconds, her blood was in that rouleau formation, and then she's taken away from that. And it comes back to normal, shall we say? Yeah. So those things can help us a lot, I think.
Thanks, Ian. I think we're going to leave it there, but I'd like to encourage people to have a look in the World Council of Health video library to access the video of your presentation at World Council of Health General Assembly a few weeks back, because it's very, very interesting, and you had some wonderful slides to illustrate.
Can I just say one thing? Yes, I know we were going to do it before Christmas, and I was going to recommend my best Christmas present, certainly for a teenager, and that would be a copy of a book by Martin Blank. He's a professor. He's worked with radiation for a long, long time. And the book is called Overpowered by Martin Blank. And I've got 3 reasons for recommending this. One, he uses very, dare I use the word, normal language, language that anybody can read quite easily. Secondly, at the back of the book, anything he says or mentions has got a reference to it in the back of the book. Masses and masses of reference. So anybody who wants to follow that reference to check what he's saying can go there straight away and find where it's published. So masses of reference. And the third thing is, it's the thinnest one that I know. With a really good content, so you're not faced with something that is this thick. It is a readable book, and if you can get your teenagers to read that, then it may make a difference. Very quickly, my nephew was putting his mobile phone. He's 15 now, 14, 15. Not my nephew, my niece's son is what I mean. My sister's grandson, putting his mobile phone in his pocket, and I said, "Reuben, do you want to have children when you grow up, when you're an adult?" And he looked at me. I said, "Because if you do, you won't put that mobile phone in your pocket, because I mean, as you know, one of the 100% certs is that that radiation affects sperm. So that's another thing. Just give them some evidence on that, and so that's my best buy book for your after Christmas present.
Thank you so much, Ian. What a pleasure, and we certainly must keep up this conversation. So I look forward to chatting with you later on in the year.
Yes, of course. It will be interesting to see where we go. I've been invited to talk in Glastonbury in July, and at the time he asked me to do that, I thought, I wonder what I should be talking about in July 2023. So
amazing. Yeah,
we shall see. We shall see. Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much for talking with me, Tess. Yeah.
Yes.